Excellent. So, welcome to Mere Mortals interviews. Today we have Zach Nadler with us. Zach, all the way from New York, thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Now, as always, we'd love to get started with a bit of a mere mortal moment of the week or the last few weeks, just to help baseline and understand, who it is, who we're talking to. We're all just human beings, and some of the little issues and things that happen in our life. So, if you could give us one of those, that'd be fantastic.
Well, there's obviously a lot going on these days, so it seems like every moment makes us all mortals. But we just launched a new business unit about a week ago. And so when you're running one business and start launching another, every little thing becomes it's a sign of your own mortality. So
Mm.
even the little minutia winds up keeping you up at night. So it was, I would say, a stack of little small moments that made a difference for me.
Excellent. And what's that new business that's just started up?
So yeah, so we're Vayner Speakers. We represent speakers. We're a speakers bureau, right?
Mm.
We launched a new line called Vayner Speakers on Campus. It's basically a speaker series specifically for college and universities. So we launched this was actually something we were planning before, I should say pre-pandemic, I guess.
Mm.
And we launched this and kind of pivoted what it was going to be to accommodate schools that aren't going to be on campus the way they expected to. So it's just something new that we launched to kind of democratize some of the content. We have fairly high price speakers and not everyone has high price budgets. So we wanted to make sure that we could get the content out to the people who want to hear it. And it was something that was a long time in the works and we were able to get it off the ground pretty quickly. But certainly has a lot of fun getting a new business off the ground in the midst of a pandemic.
Oh, I can imagine. I actually did see that. I didn't realize that it was separate piece to
hmm
the normal vein of speakers. So I guess before we dive into, yourself, just with that one, is it the ability for campuses to get really, really high quality profile individuals to speak all together in a sort of a 90-minute sessions for them, or how does that
Yeah.
work?
So the idea, it was fairly simple, right? It's something it's simple, but it's unprecedented. No one's done anything quite like this because it's hard to do this at scale. There's a lot of hurdles to do it, but the idea that we had that we've been basically put into motion is we have 5 of our clients who are presenting in a 90-minute session this fall. So every 2 weeks, starting in September, throughout the fall semester, we're going to have these sessions that are going to be simulcast to participating universities all over the globe. And we're offering it at a fraction of the price. So, virtual fees, let alone in person, but the virtual fees for the 5 speakers is well in excess of $100,000. We're offering this for $5,000 for a school, and we're also giving them access for not just their entire student body, but as well as all their alumni. So we basically figured out how we can, on the back end, the fun part was the tech side, but we figured out
Mm.
how we can simulcast these videos to a large group and keep it consolidated to the schools that are participating. So a school that ordinarily wouldn't be able to have, Gary Vaynerchuk or Ryan Holiday or any of our clients on campus, A, because of finances, but B, now because they're not able to do events. This is a way where, if you're on campus, and just going to some classes, or if you're in your parents' basement, unable to go back to school, you can still participate and watch this. And so for a lot of schools that aren't able to bring some of these speakers or any speakers to campus,
Mm.
this is a way to kind of do that. And so it's an extension, I should say, of the typical Vayner speakers, but it's certainly something that's completely different from what we're used to doing and what any group has really done before.
No, definitely. Look, if I think back to when I did university or college, I think having that sort of information would have been a dream, right? So I think it'd be, yeah, if campuses out there can take a hold of that opportunity, sounds like a really good one. So
Yeah,
look,
well, and the
before,
idea
oh,
was,
sorry.
simply, just like you said, we hear from about 40 schools a week who want to bring our clients to campus, and the sad reality is most of them don't have the budget. So we decided to figure out how do we marry these two ideas? How are we able to deliver our speakers at a lower budget? And I think we figured it out. So we're hoping things grow and it becomes a really viable unit in the next couple months.
No, certainly. So let's step back. Let's just get any of
hmm
the listeners a bit of an idea of who you are,
Sure.
Zach. I think we might have skipped over that. Just give us a brief sort of look at yourself, and then I'll probably scale that back a little bit and take us back a little while.
Absolutely. So I'm not sure how much you want me to go into, but I'm Zach Nadler. I'm the CEO of Vayner Speakers. I've been a speakers agent for, gosh, probably 13 years now. And I've basically been working with celebrities in all walks of life to get them on stages for corporations, for colleges, universities, for nonprofits, for basically any event that takes place.
No, definitely, that's awesome. And I want to just we'll take it back, right? So I want to understand this.
Hmm.
You began, almost like 9 years ago down the sports management route. So obviously,
Yes.
sort of sports was that predominant entry point, I guess. I guess talk us a little bit about that because I want to, you've managed or been part of managing Olympic
Hmm.
individuals or Olympians, also quite high profile sports persons. What I guess got you started in that line of work? What got you moving from, all right, I want to go into that sort of field and
Sure.
manage these individuals?
So I guess it's funny, you can't tell because we're on video here,
Mm.
but I'm not a big guy, right? I'm 5'11". I've been this height since seventh grade. So where I was a great basketball player, then when I stopped growing, my athletic career kind of fizzled out. And so I realized pretty quickly, like, as much as I love sports, I'm not going to be able to do it from on the field. So I got to figure out another way to keep this in my life.
Mm.
So I started studying sports management in college with the idea that I would go run a football team, American football, or run a baseball team or something like that. And, talk about a mere mortal moment. The very first class I had, it was 12:30 on a Monday, intro to sports management. Our professor comes in, he says, all right, who here wants to be a general manager of a sports team or a sports agent? Every single person but one guy raised their hand. Okay. So there's about 30 of us in the class. Everyone has their hand up. And he said, great, none of you are going to be that. He was
Mm.
like, if you want to go be an agent, you're better off going to, some basketball court, finding someone who's 6'8" and becoming best friends with them because it's gonna be a lot easier than going this other route. And if you want to be a general manager, well, there's 120 of them in the US in the professional sports.
Mm.
So if there's 120 of them, go through and try and figure out how many of them haven't been, weren't athletes, weren't coaches, don't have a background that were already in the sport, that they came up through another way. Now, this was a long time ago, about I graduated 2006. So this was about 15 years ago. And nowadays it's a little different because, Theo Epstein in baseball, he was a general manager at 29 years old. There were things like this that have changed, but it was a pretty unsettling moment when, your first day of class at college and all of a sudden, it's kind of wiped out. So when I kind of made a quick pivot, realizing that wasn't going to be the case, and I started exploring all sorts of different opportunities. And I worked with, I managed operations for a large events group, doing some charity golf tournaments, and I worked as many different kind of odd jobs as I could to learn the business. And I kind of wound up representing Olympians because, it's really difficult to break into being an agent,
Mm.
which wasn't really my goal, but it's really difficult to break into doing that. On the on-field side. There's just a ton of competition. You're not going to break out and have some amazing client right out of the gates. But the marketing side, anyone who's willing to hustle and willing to sell, can find a foot for themselves. And so I started working with a small, Olympic representation group, and we had 14 clients in Beijing in 2008. And so when I was 22 years old, I already had a career ahead of me and had marketing and sales experience. So I was able to leverage that. And we had, we had some great success with our clients that competed in Beijing. I think it was something like 22 or 23 gold medals for those 14 clients. So that was kind of how I got my start. And life takes you on a journey that you don't really expect to go on.
Mm.
So when I was working with Olympians, a lot of what they do happens to be speaking engagements, right? These guys, depending on what country you're in, it's different everywhere. In the US, most athletes are making a very modest living from their Olympic body, right? So if it's USA Swimming or USA Track and Field or any of these governing bodies, it's a very modest living. And if you want to do this as a career and compete for 2, 3, 4 Olympics the way people do now, you need to have other sources of income. And so usually folks are doing speaking engagements, doing endorsement deals. And so our clients relied on us to basically make them enough money so that they could keep training, 8 to 10 hours a day to compete in the Olympics. And so that was kind of how I got started, and then realized that there's a whole other world than just the speaking world out there. And I got recruited to join CAA, which, was obviously, a major change going from representing Olympians and, having 14 clients in Beijing to having thousands of clients that I had to
Mm.
look after for different opportunities. So that's just a kind of quick story of how it got there. But I still am an avid sports fan. Now I just do it from a little bit of a different view. And, my partner and my biggest client, Gary Vaynerchuk, is an enormous New York Jets fan. Avid, and I'm a diehard Patriots fan.
Well, it was
So I
just
was able to keep that from him for quite some time. But once he found out, he was none too pleased. So it's something where, sports is still very much a big part of my life. But you know, we all have dreams. You know, you don't hear a lot of people at 10 years old saying they want to go grow up to be a speaker's agent, right? It's
Mm.
usually I want to be a firefighter, I want to be an astronaut. So it's a career that most people don't get excited about, but it's a $4 billion industry, or at least it was before the pandemic. And so it's something where it's a pretty massive industry that we've kind of tried to do some different things in, and it's been a lot of fun, but not necessarily the path I expected to get here.
No, definitely. I love that journey. Sounds amazing. But one of the things I want to touch base, right? You're talking about the Olympians, because I want to pull out
Hmm.
potentially a story there, because I think everyone would hear that and think, wow, that's amazing. That's fantastic. It sounded like an absolute dream. What was probably some of the biggest challenges you had in some of that management of those
Sure.
Olympians? So I was trying to pull out, yeah, what were the challenges that you found specifically there? That way we can sort of translate that over into your normal sort of speaking
Yeah,
engagements.
well, you know, like I said, I went into that side of the business because if you have hustle and you have, you know, the will to succeed, you can succeed, right? But that means you actually have to do the work. And so for 2 years, I was literally banging down the doors. I was knocking on doors and calling people left and right, cold calling, asking them like, "Hey, there's an Olympian that is from your city, and you know, you guys are a great company in your city. You should support him in some way. Do an endorsement deal." And so I would say for every, you know, every 100 calls I got, or I took, maybe 2 calls would even have interest, right?
Mm,
And so it toughens you up, and you get thick skin at the end of it, right? It's a really difficult job, and so the challenge is really just to keep at it, because it's really difficult work, and you're calling people, and you're, you know, people are putting their trust in you that you're going to represent them. You're going to do a great job, and it requires a lot of energy. It requires a lot of will, to actually go back out there after you hear 100 no's, to still keep making phone calls. You know, not every deal is going to be a $1 million deal. So you got to be willing to say, great, all this work, and it was, you know, a $25,000
yeah.
deal, right? But that 25,000 is really meaningful for someone. And
Mm.
so the challenge really was the work that went into it, but that helped me kind of have a base point for what the next, you know, 15 years of my life are going to look like, how hard it was really going to be to succeed. And I think people always say that they're willing to put in the work, but until you actually start doing it, it's easier said than done.
No, definitely. And so, Zach, for you, where do you see that passion gets driven from? Obviously, you know, you're saying to hustle and you got to work hard to actually make things come to fruition. Have you always had that to yourself? Is that something that sort of came naturally to you?
Yeah, I mean, I like to keep busy, so you
Mm,
know, I'm somewhat of a workaholic. You know, I think you got to kind of find your own motivations, right? Everyone, you know, it's a little bit different. It's always tough, I think, to stay focused and keep going forward. I think I'm naturally driven. I don't need a whole lot to, you know, a lot of a carrot to dangle. You know, it helps. You know, when I was first doing that, that was a commission-based job, so
mm,
I ate what I hunted, right? So there's something to it. But I think ultimately, you know, I'm just motivated by getting ahead, right? I don't have this. You know, it's funny. Gary talks a lot about owning the New York Jets, and that's his motivation. He's like, it's not. He always says it's not actually owning the Jets that he's going for. It's the ride. It's the effort to get to the point where you can own the Jets, right? All
mm.
of that is the fun. And so I think I kind of look at it similarly. While I have no desire to own the Jets, I don't have this end goal necessarily in mind, but I'm enjoying the experience of getting to where I'm going to go. And I think it's a little bit of unbridled ambition. And sometimes I dive a little too hard into you know, work.
Mm.
But it's something where, you know, if you could look back and enjoy it and have fun with it while you're doing it, I think, you know, you can find motivation if you need to.
No, certainly. So we brought up Gary. I guess the next
Hmm.
point I just wanted to talk to you about is, you know, that sort of story creator that you've got up to that point, and then there was a pivot, obviously, and Vayner Speakers was born. So you've known Gary for a little while, and
Hmm.
you know,
11
it's
years.
so there you go, so quite a long time. And he was previously, I guess, a partner through sort of speaking engagements. What was that sort of critical point, that influx that went, you know, we can do this thing on our own with our own Vayner Speakers sort of
Sure.
company and run with that?
Yeah. So when I left Olympic representation, I joined a large talent agency based in LA. I was in New York called Creative Artists Agency. Gary was already a client there when I started. So we first connected in 2009. And it was something where I saw, you know, his enthusiasm. You know, right back then he was kind of, he was a nobody, right? I think he was known as like the wine guy, right? A
Mm,
social media guru. All of these things that I think were just kind of labels put on him, and he built his own career, and he did so, and he would say something and then do it. And he was an ardent believer in his own ambition, his own success. And We just were very much aligned in terms of how we saw the process of business, right? Keeping it kind of customer focused, doing the right thing, not necessarily the most beneficial thing for you, but doing the right thing for everyone. And so we had a great relationship. And look, we had a lot of conversations over the years about doing things differently, but frankly, it's interesting because I've been thinking about it a lot. 2011, I did a video conference event with Gary. He came to the office on a Sunday morning. I know it's up early for you right now. We did a video conference event where it was 5 a.m. on a Sunday, and we streamed to Poland. We did a wine tasting. Okay, he met me at the office. I'm there, dreary-eyed, probably hungover, and he walks up with more energy than I have right now or ever will have. And he, we were doing video conference back in 2011, right? And now people are like pivoting their businesses towards video conference. We're looking at it going, we've been there, we've done that. And I think part of the fun that Gary and I have always had is we don't have the limitations, right? We're able to do deals differently. I'd bring him some pretty weird things and he would look at it and say, what is this? And we'd sometimes say, well, if we figure out this or we figure out that, we can make it work. And I think that the innovations that we always put on things, the creativity we had together was something that we saw we could translate. It was an opportunity. Obviously, he's built an extremely large brand for himself with all of his social media followers, over 8 million on Instagram. When we started Vayner Speakers, he had less than 4 million. And so he's continued to build his brand significantly. And we saw it as an opportunity to kind of do the innovations that we've done and take those and put them at scale, right? That's kind of what he does. And he's so good at is taking ideas and scaling them. And so he, trusted in me that I could get this off the ground. And I think we've done a great job doing so. And it's something where it's a great partnership because he, he is a resource and there for us when we need him. And having, if we were to start a speakers bureau, having one of the biggest speakers in the world as a soundboard for ideas is a pretty good resource to have. So it's been a pretty wild ride, but something where, we've just worked together a long time. Like we know each other really well. Like I've known his assistants for 6-7 years. So it's something where, we've been doing this for so long together that I have an intimate knowledge of kind of his businesses, and it has allowed us to have some great success here early on. We're really excited about where things are going.
No, certainly. I could imagine that. Now, with Vayner Speakers then, where would you see, obviously we're in the middle of a pandemic, everyone's, it's kind of hard to get together 10,000, 20,000 people, and you have been doing the virtual thing. I think you guys have done hologram things as well.
We've done live events, we've done pre-recorded events, we've done virtual, or we've done holograms. We've done, whitelisted versions of YouTube shows, right? So we've done pretty much everything under the sun. And the crazy thing with the virtual world is no two events are the same, just like in real life, right? No two conferences are the same and have the same expectations of a speaker. And it's the same thing with a virtual event, right? You may say, great, we're going to do a virtual event. That can mean you're doing a 30-minute Q&A, or it can mean a 2-hour speech, right? So we've kind of had to be flexible and remain open to kind of any and all ideas. But we had been doing virtual events prior to that since we started the business, and since Gary and I have been doing it since 2011. So it didn't take a huge change for us, but I think some of our competitors had to kind of figure this out on the fly.
No, definitely. Where would you see then, obviously pandemic currently here, that might slowly go over time, but we're not too sure what the future may hold. Where do you see, from sitting with Vayner Speakers, where do you see that growth coming in the future? Is it going to be mostly down the virtual route? Do you see that you're still going to get back to those bigger audiences, or is there something else that you're starting to see in the horizon around how it might be able to connect with people?
It's a great question. I think it's really hard to say where things are going to go because we didn't predict this in the first place. If you look 10 years ago, people were talking about virtual was going to replace live events, and that certainly hasn't happened. It was just, it added to them, right? It's a new opportunity. I think you're going to see that when the world is kind of healed, right? When we're able, whether it's a vaccine or we have things under more control, I think you're going to see people want to get out there, right? There's a willingness, to be with people. And I think that for all the virtual events, I think they've come a long way, and I think that they're great. The one thing they haven't been able to replicate is the idea of networking, the idea of being around in that community that you would have with other people. So until that there's a perfect system, and if you have a good one, we can go make $1 billion together. But until there's that perfect system for networking, like you have on site, right? Going to drinks after the sessions or having breakfast with someone, there's going to be no replacing live events. And I think that in the short term, you're going to probably see places like Orlando or Vegas where you're having those 10,000 person events are probably going to be hurt for, little bit longer than other places. But I think you'll see in the not too distant future, localized events, right? Company of 200 people, right? They're saying we're working in the office together. There's not a huge risk for us exposing ourselves if we're doing an event with ourselves, right? And so you're going to see a lot of those kind of events. I think you're going to see some hybrids where you see speakers streaming into an event that's happening in person. So it may be 250 doctors in Sydney, right? And then you may stream in a speaker rather than someone flying in. And so you're going to see more things like that. And I think you're going to actually see more small events, which is going to mean that there's going to be more of them at volume. Because people aren't going to want to get on a plane, but they're going to still want the experience. And so whether they're satellite events that kind of stream into a larger event, you're going to see some new innovations that are happening. I've seen some really cool stuff with virtual trade shows, where people are able to kind of have an avatar and walk around a trade show floor, have kind of interactions with people one-on-one. The world is going to adapt, right? We saw that 10 years ago when there was a recession. One of my clients, Ryan Holiday, has in one of his books, he has a list of about 25 companies that started in some of the worst times and some of the biggest companies in the world. And every time something like this, it's an opportunity to see what comes next and to feel out new things. We're very bullish on Vayner Speakers on Campus, right? That was an idea that we had pre-pandemic, but we launched it during the pandemic. And, we're hopeful that that's going to be a future piece for us. But we think that it's something where this industry isn't going away. It's certainly been hit. But I think the events industry in general is something where you'll never be able to replace the one-on-one interaction people have. And I think it's only a matter of time when people are going to want to get back out there, support tourism. I'm sure people are also getting pretty stir crazy, right?
Oh,
you're in a big city, you're locked in an apartment. If you have kids, you are, dealing with kids running around the house while you're trying to work. And I think people will still look for, not that they just wanted to escape their family, but they'll be looking for reasons to get out. And I think that those things will come back in a big, powerful way. But I think it's going to take some time for the largest of the events to happen. Because it's just not safe. And I think people need to be smart. And I think you'll see probably some missteps before it all gets better. But I'm hopeful that people kind of approach things the right way, that we'll be able to kind of get back sooner than later. And look, we have events on the books in the fall. We just booked something for October. Right. So we're only a couple months away from that. I think things are already getting better. And I think that we're well on our way, but there's still plenty of work that has to be done.
No, certainly. Now, obviously, speaking, Brian, you're quite close, obviously, to Gary Vaynerchuk. You work with Ryan Holiday and a whole host of other individuals in Vayner Speakers. And a lot of people, I've talked to a lot of people as well, and quite likely people listening, they think, oh, that's amazing. Someone like a Gary, you can go and do a presentation and get 100, 200 grand for such a presentation. What is the difference with these individuals, like a Gary, like a Ryan, when they talk, when they present, that you don't generally see with everyday individuals, that really makes them, that extra level that you go, okay, that is why they're worth that?
Yeah, well, I think, there's two sides of it. I think there's all sorts of different speakers, but as I've looked, I think you have people who are great content wise, and then you have people who are great name recognition and they can draw a big ticket. And then you have people who are both, right? And there's varying degrees. And I think that the average person may have the skill set able to get on stage, but I think the hard part is the piece that you're missing is the draw, right? Somebody has to be willing to pay you to get on stage. And I think most people say, I can do it, right? I just need the opportunity. Well, nobody's just going to hand you an opportunity, right? You can't say like, hey, I'm a great, baseball player, great basketball player. I just need the opportunity. It's like, well, if you were a great basketball player, you'd be playing on a team. If you were somewhere where somebody saw you, they would say, hey, why don't you play for us, right? That's kind of how it works. And so it's just the same as everything else. I think the skills are something that can be honed. I think the average person can be a great speaker. It's about figuring out how you deliver your message, owning your message, because I think a lot of people just memorize. And I think if you don't believe and like really, really, really believe in what you're saying and know it inside and out. So if you're just telling your life story, it better be interesting, right? Yeah. If you're sharing like thesis or experimentation or something like that you've done, you better understand all the inner workings of it, because when people ask you questions, you're going to have to own that. And it's something that evolves, right? Not everyone wants to hear your message. So you have to figure out what makes it exciting for that audience to hear your message. And so I think, what's happened is, with YouTube and with the explosion of technology, it's allowed more people to be seen. And regular average people, right? I used to say this all the time when I work with celebrities. Celebrities are just like you and me. They just have way better stories, right? So you're more interested in hearing a story from, a famous actor than you are from your dentist. But that doesn't mean your dentist doesn't have good stories. So they can have good stories or be a good storyteller. But you have to put the two together, and you have to figure out how you make it interesting. And to get on stage and be paid, you basically, from a fee standpoint, it's what somebody's willing to pay you, and it's what you're willing to leave the house for. And that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah. And I know you've mentioned this before in other interviews as well, so we won't delve too much in there, but, a lot of people as well ask, how can I get into it? I want to be a speaker. I want to try and present. I think I've got a good story to share. Do those sort of individuals, should they be reaching out directly to speak agencies like yourself, or should they be going down the path of trying to connect with other people?
It's a question I get all the time on the street as well. I think it's something where a speaker agent is there to help when you can't handle it yourself, right? Some of the best speakers in the world don't have agents. And I think there's a misnomer that in order to be successful, you need an agent. No, it's in order to navigate, you need an agent. You can sell your house, but it's a lot easier if you have a real estate agent who knows what they're doing and to navigate that. So if you have a good house for sale and you just start shouting from your driveway, people will maybe come up and offer to buy your house. But if you have a listing agent who's putting it out there and making more people aware of it, it makes your life a little easier. Speaking is the same thing. And I think we look at it as just because you can be a great speaker or you have a good story, we're not necessarily, and I think most agencies aren't going to just represent you. I think you need to be out there speaking, right? Anyone can just put speaker in their Instagram profile. But what makes you a speaker is being on stages. And so it's important to just get out there, just like anything else. You want to build up your arms, you start doing curls. You want to be a good speaker, you start getting on stages, right? Ask your friends, your buddy has a 50-person construction company. Hey, can I just come in and talk to your guys, right? Your son is on a high school basketball team. Great, just go talk to the team, right? If you can't get in front of small groups for free, why is anyone going to pay you to be somewhere? And I think that it just takes the reps, get good, and then every audience, there's someone else there who's doing an event. And eventually it gets to the point where you can't handle the incoming requests and you need someone to help you. And that's usually how things go. And I think one of my favorite parts about working with Gary is everyone sees him as this, massive figure doing, 100 speeches a year. Well, I can remember the time very clearly when nobody wanted to book Gary Vaynerchuk. And he was like, I'm a great speaker. Why is no one booking me? And no one knew who he was. He had a great message. And it's just about creating awareness for yourself, for your message, and being good with what it is. So it takes a long time, right? It didn't happen overnight for him, and it doesn't happen overnight for many people. Just nowadays with stuff like YouTube and TED, you can usually get a faster start, but you still have to put in the work to get to where you want to be.
No, certainly. And I mean, I think it's a fault of, not being able to see the true picture, right? Like we're talking with yourself, Zach, and you go, oh, well, CEO of Vayner Speakers, and it kind of might seem like, oh, that happened overnight. And you go, actually, 13 years of work here in the background that sort of led to this and where it continues. It's interesting how people can sometimes, not view that and think, okay, well, I can probably do that in the next year or two.
Yeah, I think look, I don't fault anyone. And I think that there are also great examples, right? I've certainly worked with clients who came out of nowhere and within a year were a massive success, right? It happens. But it's also something where there's usually a platform they're launching from, right? Did you release a book and it was a bestseller? Were you involved in some sort of, major world event where people want to hear your story? Did you just sell your business for $500 million and it was reported by Forbes, right? Are there interesting things where people, want to hear from you? And the ironic truth around speaking is that people want to hear from the people who have the least incentive to speak. So we get requests for Jack Ma and Mark Zuckerberg and Oprah. Well, what's the benefit for them to go out and do these things, right? Most people at a certain point no longer have interest. And when people want to be out there is when they have the time and they think it's going to be helpful for their career. And then when suddenly they're really busy and it's like, well, what do you mean? Like now I have to miss this meeting or I have to miss this thing for my kids. Well, now I'm not going to do that for free. Pay me 10 grand. They say, okay. And it's like, okay, well now I'll go. Right. And then once you start getting paid, suddenly it's I owe it to them. They're paying me. I have to make sure I deliver. Yeah. And there's a lot of pressure on you to do so. And so it's easier to say like, I want to have a great speaking career, there's a lot of speakers I could put you in touch with who will tell you it's grind, right?
Mm.
We were talking earlier, Gary, first time he went to Australia, he was there for 8 hours. So it was like a 22-hour flight. He was there for 8 hours. He turned around, he stopped in Honolulu and Cleveland, did meetups in both airports, and then came home. The second time he came to Australia, he was there for 36 hours and did 3 events. Now that's an extreme example, but you got to be willing to get on a plane and go to events. And it's not always the most glamorous life to, be staying at, hotels in the middle of nowhere near a convention center. But if you really want it, then you should be willing to get out there and prove that you're worth it. And then when you have so many, opportunities that you have to start turning them down, or it's affecting other parts of your business or life, that's when you got to start charging people. But it's hard to just, wake up one day and say, you know what, I think I deserve $25,000 for a speech.
Yeah, no, certainly. Yeah, I think everyone's got this grandiose view that, they can present and get this money and then they'll be able to go home, and then don't realize, the preparation, the setup, the going to places, the talking, the connecting, everything that must go in the background to get it to that point. Then you go, okay, there's quite a bit here, and I've got to share this story.
I always give, I think my colleagues probably get annoyed when I use the same cliches around the office, but I always say it's a lot like, inviting someone to a wedding. When it's like booking like a speaker, it's like, I can just say, do you want to come to my wedding? And you're going to say, sure, like I'll come to your wedding. But then when I say, hey, do you want to come to my wedding? It's tomorrow. And it's in Alaska. And it's like, whoa, like, I don't know about that. So oftentimes people kind of get these ideas, but when they realize what actually goes into it, it's a little bit of a different world.
Now, Zach, does Vayner Speakers currently, so I guess, with your colleagues there and your, the individuals that you work with, are you guys distributed, or you work out of one base area?
So we're all based in New York. We work out of the Vayner Media offices in Hudson Yards, New York. So we're all based there, though right now we're all working from home. Office is closed for at least the next few months. We'll see when we go back there, probably this fall. But we're all housed. There's Gary is his headquarters is in New York, but there's offices all over the world. So we're all based together.
Yeah. How are you finding the changeover to obviously being based all at home and working a little bit more distributed? Obviously, all of you guys are still in New York, but working without being able to, just talk to someone on your left and your right. Have you guys found much difficulty there, or have you just flourished with that?
It's interesting. I've worked from home twice before. So the first time I worked from home, I think I was 21. I was not great, right? I was not particularly motivated. I could get easily distracted, and it wasn't that productive, right? The second time I worked from home a few years later, I had a whole system down, right? I was able to work from home and I was very effective and efficient. And I think that it takes, some maturity to get to that point. We've adapted pretty well. There are things that we had set. We had a text chain between our team, but well before the pandemic, and that has been more active now than ever before. Thanks to technology, things like Slack, Zoom, Google Hangouts, we're able to connect and see each other all the time. I think it's really a personal thing. I think everyone has to figure out their own system and strategies for being effective. And thankfully our team has done a great job of doing so. I think everyone, adapted pretty quickly. I think the tough part is the distractions. I have an infant at home. I have a puppy. My wife is also here. So, it's New York. We have a decent sized apartment, but it's still a situation where, people, I think, are all living their own world, right? And so it's different for everyone. And I think it's a world now where we're all in the same boat. Everyone is not kind of where they want to be, and kind of adapting to the new world. So I think there has been I think people are a little more forgiving than they once were. But we found it to be pretty easy to just adapt. And I think it's just, honestly, what we always preach, and it's now just more true than ever, it's communication. You can communicate with one another however you figure out how. It's just making sure that everyone's aware of information. So we had good systems in place beforehand, and it was just more important than ever to kind of follow those systems.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, no, you can, there's always various ways that you can communicate, but if you're not doing it the right way and not getting absorbing that, then it becomes an issue. Before we continue on some of those other professional things, I can't go past that point, right? You're a new dad, Zach. You've also, as well, I think it was a 1-year-old puppy as well.
Yes.
What are the challenges that you found there? Has it changed much of your routine? Because obviously you're a hardworking sort of guy.
Yeah.
How's that changed?
My routine. So, I had my firstborn. My daughter was born March 6th. So that was less than a week before New York went on quarantine.
Mm.
And it was a big change. I think routine, like you mentioned, that's something that I'm a creature of habit, and that was completely flipped upside down. Babies don't really care what your plans were, right? They want what they want when they want it. So she's actually an easy baby, knock on wood here, and she is a delight. So I have
Mm.
no complaints, but it's certainly something where it's just taken, other parents I've spoken to always say when you have your baby, you realize that suddenly your life isn't yours, you're selfless. And, I think, to, a lesser extent, when you run a company, your employees, like you work for them, they don't work for
Mm.
you. And so it's a very similar idea. It's just a lot more, it's a lot headier, right? So it's a lot more you got to think about.
Yeah.
So it's certainly taken a lot of adaptation. I give my wife a ton of credit because, we're really in this together. And I couldn't do any of what I'm doing if it wasn't for her. Our puppy probably has taken it worse than anyone.
Mm.
She misses all of her puppy friends. They closed the dog park, so she probably has the most horror stories of all of us. But it's really something where I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing if it weren't for my wife. And obviously, the rest of the team at Vayner Speakers has done a tremendous job.
Mm.
I probably didn't get a paternity leave, which pros and cons of that, but I'll also be home with my baby for 6 months, so hard to complain after all.
Yeah. No, interesting how, things like that play out where you have your baby just before the pandemic, and all of a sudden, you get to spend a lot of time. So sometimes there's some positivity in the darkness that we sometimes see, right?
Exactly. And I keep looking and saying, she's a welcome distraction. She doesn't know there's a pandemic. She doesn't know
Mm.
what's going on. So when you just kind of you're having a bad day or something's going wrong, or you're getting cooped up, and you look at her and she smiles, it kind of melts you, and everything changes from there.
It gives you a completely different perspective, right? You think of all
Mhm.
these crazy things happening and all the fires you have to put out, and then you might look at a loved one or your baby and you go, yeah, yeah. Sometimes it
Yeah,
just boils down to being very simple and being happy with what you have.
exactly. And I keep saying, we're all in this, right? No
Mm.
one is sitting there going, my life hasn't changed at all, right? Everyone is affected in one way, shape, or form. So I think it's having some empathy for other people's situations. No one knows what you're dealing with, and you don't know what anyone else is dealing with. And
Mm.
so you can't really put expectations on others to um, keep things normal, right? It's about adapting and helping people when they need help. So I have colleagues who have two kids at home. I have colleagues who live with their parents or their grandparents. Everyone's kind of in a different boat, and I think it's really important that we kind of recognize that. But
Mm.
it's everyone's going to have their own challenges, and today may be tougher for you than for someone else, and tomorrow may be the opposite. So you got to kind of be willing to adapt and kind of recognize that you don't know everything that's going on out there, but people don't know everything about you either.
No, certainly. And look, Zach, with Vayner Speakers, where's the
Hmm.
growth path looking for that? Are you guys looking to, grow to a much bigger
Hmm.
scale, or is the view to, connect with the current, speakers that you guys have and just broaden the way that you reach? Where does the growth come for Vayner
Yeah,
Speakers?
I mean, it's the Jerry Maguire problem.
Mm.
If you're familiar with the movie, he talks about keep things small so you can actually have the relationships. And I think that's always the problem with agencies is you grow too big and then you lose the value of the relationship. I think we like being a small company. I'd like to keep Vayner Speakers kind of boutique and feel,
Mm.
but agency size and kind of scale. So I think we plan to grow. We plan to continue to grow. I think we are constantly looking for new ideas. What I love is we're not bound by bureaucracy. We get to think of new ideas and try things out. So, if it's, Vayner Speakers on campus, right, that's something that we were able to get off the ground in just a matter of weeks.
Mm.
A lot of other places, that's going to be something that takes years if you're
Yeah.
lucky. So we're forward thinking, we're trying new things. We'll always continue to grow, whether it's adding staff, adding clients, and, creating new ideas. But the core of the business will always be speaking engagements and getting our clients out there and getting them to events. Just for now, it's obviously a lot more virtual events than it is in person.
No, certainly. There's always power in being that sort of smaller, more agile business
Hmm.
organization because you can pivot that much quicker. Now, obviously, with a pandemic or something else that might come along the way, you're able to change your way to where does it matter? Where those sort of bigger agencies or bigger organizations, it just takes them a long time to pivot. Here in
Yeah.
Australia, I actually work for the federal government, and let me tell you, there's some slow going in there for sure. So it's very, very
Yes, the
interesting.
red tape is certainly always going to
Ah,
hold you back. I'm lucky. Gary does a great job of kind of letting the reins off us, and so he doesn't hold us back with anything, but I think there's also, you want to be smart, right? We want to basically build this thing the smart way. And, we've done so far, right? We scaled it up, and, we're 7 employees, and we were 3 this time last year. So we've been growing really fast. It hasn't even been a 2-year ride. So we've got a long ways to go, but we're excited about it because so far so good. And the future, pandemic not a factor. Hopefully the future is bright.
No, certainly. Now, Zach, I've got a couple of quick fire questions, but always they don't have to be quick fire answers from yourself. So there's a couple of these ones. One is, if you could post one thing right on social media that everybody in the world would see, what would that message be, or what would that post be?
That message be, or what would that post be? So I'm not one who is very prescriptive, right? I'm not typically someone who's kind of giving people other advice unless they ask me. That's kind of something my father told me. Like, unless you ask me, I'm not going to tell you. But I do think that, what I was saying before, just think about your situation and realize that no one knows everything going on with you, and you're not going to know everything going on with everyone else.
Excellent. I like that. Another one I've got here is, what is, right now we'll take it. What does a perfect day look like for you, Zach? If you could structure it the way you want, in that habitual sense, what would the perfect day look like?
The perfect day for me. Wow. I would say waking up at 6 a.m, but being well rested, which is probably an impossibility, but waking up at 6 a.m, taking my dog for a walk without a face mask on, coming back, my baby just waking up and being able to feed her first thing in the morning. And then spending the day where, we often joke that we're firefighters, right? We're actually just here putting out fires all day long. It's triage. It's just a matter of what's going wrong today. And having a day without fires would be great. And having a day where everything goes as planned, and there's no technology issues, there's no travel issues, and having a day where things just kind of go smoothly would be nice. And that seems like it's far ways away. But I think it will be here sooner than we can expect.
Hopefully. Do you have normally, so you're talking about obviously a morning routine then. Do you generally have a morning routine or a sort of a nighttime routine that you try to stick to the most as possible?
I definitely have a morning routine though. With the baby, it's in the pandemic, it's been thrown off. But I definitely have a morning routine. I'm not much of a nighttime routine guy. I kind of like my nights to be free. I always say I am extremely focused and I'm extremely efficient, but so I can be extremely lazy at the same time. So if I can save myself 5 minutes at the end of the day because of something I did at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, then great. And so I like to wind down, really thinking about nothing and being calm. I don't watch much TV now. I like to spend time with my family and just kind of relax. And so that can mean a lot of different things, but to me, the lack of routine at night is kind of what, keeps things from being monotonous.
Oh, definitely. Just something that came to mind. Did you recently have someone borrow your loft to do a TV show? Is that correct?
Yes.
How did that work?
You can imagine, the few weeks before quarantine certainly was an interesting time. So we had someone knock on our door, and there was a location manager for Law and Order SVU. And we thought it was a joke at first, but fast forward a week and we had a crew filming in our apartment for 3 days. And this was a week before my baby was born. So we thought, well, if we have plenty of time, and this will be great. And sure enough, it was 1 week and 1 day after they left, we had our baby. And so it was pretty wild. It was interesting to see it on TV. They use a lot more of the apartment than I expected them to. We were still here while it was going on, but it was pretty fun. It's one of my wife's favorite shows, so we enjoyed it for sure.
You definitely should have popped your head in around the side of the filming just so you could get yourself on the show.
There's a lot of little things like I always make fun of my wife. She's whimsical. She finds really cute things to kind of decorate our apartment with, and so it's something that's great. So we have a very unique apartment. They came to us saying they wanted an artsy loft. I think they got that. And so, while I may not be in it, you see some of our unique items that I don't think you'll find anywhere else. So whether it's a mini hammock that we keep bananas in, to a tin dinosaur that we have in our window that made it into the show, we have our stamp on that, on those couple scenes.
That's awesome. I feel like your apartment needs a whole separate show just to take it through. It sounds pretty whimsical.
Not indeed. Right now. People tell you things get crazy with a baby. It looks like a war zone these days.
It's got to navigate through. The banana's probably on the ground. For yourself, Zach, short-term goals and long-term goals. Sort of, it'd be keen to hear for yourself. short-term goals for you and some long-term goals for you? It could be with Vayner speakers or personal.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, short-term goals, Vayner speakers on campus is a big focus for us.
Mm.
So we're putting a lot of our energy behind that. We think it's something that is going to be, has a long life to it. So we see that as a short-term goal now of just, we just launched it last week, so getting it off the ground. But we see that being something that's going to exist for 10, 15, 20 years. Long-term, uh, I think the company itself is doing great. I think the trajectory we're on is fantastic. So I think that will take care of itself. Um, I look forward to, the new world, and it's
Mm.
going to be different for me when I leave home and start going back to an office. So long-term goals are, mostly things are related to my daughter,
Yeah.
being able to see her do all the things that I'm able to see her do now. I want to make sure that I maintain that, because I'm fortunate to have this time with her, and just because the world stopped doesn't mean when it starts again that I want to give that part up. So
Yeah.
that's really my long-term goal.
No, that's awesome. Who would be for you, Zach, someone you'd love to sit down, either past or present, over a coffee or over a beer? Who would be that person that for you'd be like, oh, I'd love to have a discussion with this individual that you haven't already?
Wow. Do they have to be alive?
They don't have to be alive, no.
So I would probably say my father's father, who died when my father was an infant.
Right.
I just think that would be a fascinating conversation with someone who my father didn't have a chance to meet, and I
Mm.
certainly didn't. So I would definitely, I would say my grandfather on my father's side.
All right. And
Everything I've heard about him was he was a fascinating guy, and so there would just be so many questions I would have for
mm,
someone like that.
what made it fascinating to you?
Just the life he led, and also my grandmother, who I was really close to.
Mm.
I think it was a different time, but hearing my father tell stories about him when my father never knew him, it's fascinating just to see, kind of like what could have been,
Mm.
right? Who someone would have become, and I think it's, I think if I knew all my other grandparents, so I was lucky and I was fortunate, but having that time back, I think would be pretty cool.
That's amazing. No, I like that. And last but not least, to you, who's sort of the most successful person that you know?
The most successful person that I know.
Mm.
Ooh, this is always a question I have with friends, because I got a lot of big phone numbers in my
Yep.
cell phone. I've worked with some major celebrities over the days.
Mm.
So when you say no, uh, Gary's probably the person I know the best who's the most successful.
Mm.
But I've worked with some, significant luminaries from all walks of life, be it some of the biggest athletes in the world, some of the biggest entrepreneurs in the world, actors and musicians. And I've been fortunate enough to really get to know a lot of interesting people. And, like I said, they're just like you and I, they had better stories. So I've been fortunate enough to hear a lot of those fun stories.
Ah, look, I can imagine the individuals like Gary or, famous actors or musicians, they would just have stories for days, right? Because it's just when you have days where you're able to connect with so many people and go to places and see places and do things, you'll just generally, create stories out of that just most
Hmm.
individuals, you'll be at home, you'll go to work and you'll come back home. You just sort of don't create them as much so.
Yeah. And I think, truthfully, what's been interesting is, I'm here, it's me, my wife, my dog, and my baby.
Mm.
And you think it would be very monotonous, but it's some of the most interesting stuff is just what happens day to day in our house. And so they give my wife all the credit for that, for keeping it fun.
Oh, you always have to keep it fun. Zach, look, it's been wonderful to talk to you, mate. Where can people find you if they want to sort of either interact with you, follow along with sort of your normal life, or just Vayner speakers in general?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I'm Zach Nadler, Zach with an H, on pretty much all platforms. Check us out on VaynerSpeakers.com or VaynerSpeakersOnCampus.com. And if you ever need anything, hit us up on Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter. We're out there and we're watching. So let us know how we can help you. And certainly, if you want to book any of our clients or non-clients, we're happy to help you.
Excellent. Zach, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.